The quiet girl they ignored was called a wallflower. Until the Mafia boss stepped in to protect her, Noor had always been the kind of person who made herself invisible. Not because she was weak, not because she had nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way, she had learned that invisible was safe. Invisible meant no one could come for you. If you stayed in the background, smiled politely, and kept your opinions tucked quietly inside yourself, the world left you alone. And for a long time, the world had. She was 23 years old when she started working at a mid-sized financial firm in the city. She had a degree she had worked 3 part-time jobs to fund, grades that should have put her in front of much bigger rooms, and a mind that could pull apart a financial report the way most people flip through a magazine. Fast, instinctive, catching every little thing that didn't sit right. She was, by every honest measure, one of the best people in that building. But she sat in the back of every meeting. She ate lunch alone at her desk. She kept her voice low and her opinions to herself. And some of her coworkers walked past her desk 3 times a day without registering that she was there. They had a name for her, though. Not said to her face. People rarely said things to Noor's face. They said it in the break room, over coffee, in the kind of half-logs that stop just before they become cruel. They called her the Wallflower. Her mother had raised her alone. 2 jobs, tired eyes, love that never ran out even when the money did. When Noor was small, her mother used to stroke her hair and say, "Keep your head down, Habibti. Don't give people a reason to come for you." Noor had taken those words and carried them everywhere. Into every classroom, every job interview, every meeting she ever sat in the back of. They had shaped everything about how she moved through the world, how much space she took up, how loudly she spoke, how often she let her own ideas disappear into silence. But the problem with keeping your head down is that some people read it as an invitation. Ryan was the kind of person who noticed the difference immediately. He was charming in that polished, effortless way, the sort of man who walked into rooms like he already knew the outcome. He dressed well, laughed easily, and had a gift for making managers feel like the ideas he borrowed were actually his own. He was also doing very little real work. Noor saw that clearly. She saw everything clearly. She just never said a word about it. When she stayed late 2 evenings in a row to finish a detailed analysis, Ryan stood up and presented it in the Monday morning meeting, like it had come from his own head. When she caught an error in a client report that would have cost the firm money, Ryan sent the correction email with just his name at the bottom. When the senior manager praised the team's quarterly numbers in front of everyone, Ryan nodded from the front row with the confidence of a man who had lived inside those spreadsheets himself. Noor had lived inside those spreadsheets. But she sat in the back and said nothing. Her only real friend at the office was Pia, a younger girl, an intern, full of warmth and opinions, and that particular kind of frustration that comes from watching injustice happen in slow motion. After meetings, Pia would lean over and whisper, "You know that was your work, right?" And Noor would always say, "It's fine." And Pia would look at her with a kind of aching love, like she was watching someone walk into a wall they could clearly see, but just refused to move out of the way for. That October, a new client came. His name was Victor Sorel. The moment that name appeared in the company email chain, the office did something strange. It went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. There was a kind of collective holding of breath that happens when someone with real power enters your orbit. Victor Sorel was 40 years old, Eastern European, the owner of a global holdings company with businesses in real estate, logistics, and private security spread across more than 10 countries. He was wealthy in the kind of way that had stopped needing to prove itself a long time ago. There were rumors, too. Quiet ones, the kind people made sure never found their way onto paper, that his family had a complicated past, that where his money had originally come from was not where it stood today, that the polished, legitimate businesses had been built slowly and deliberately on top of something far older that he had spent many years trying to leave behind. Nobody asked questions. In the financial world, a certain amount of looking away is part of the job description. He was the client. And clients like Victor Sorel did not walk through your doors twice. Noor was assigned to his account because she was the most reliable person in that office, even if no one said it out loud. Ryan had scheduling conflicts. The manager quietly knew who would actually get it done without being asked twice. She took the files home that first evening and read through everything. By the next morning, She had already found something the previous team had completely missed, a structural issue buried in an overseas filing from a few years back that had quietly created a tax problem across several jurisdictions. Not intentional, but serious. The kind of thing that becomes very expensive if it sits there undiscovered. She walked into the first meeting with her notes organized and her voice steady. Victor had arrived before anyone else. He sat across from her in the empty conference room, two quiet men stationed near the door, and he looked at her in a way she was not used to. Not past her, not through her, directly at her, like she was already the most important person in the room, and the rest of the meeting was just a formality. "You found the issue in the old filing," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "It's structural, not intentional, but it creates exposure in several jurisdictions, and it needs to be addressed before." "I know," he said. "No one here noticed it until now." He looked at her for a moment. "What is your name?" she told him. He repeated it back quietly, slowly, like a man filing something away in a place he planned to return to. When the rest of the team swept in 2 minutes later, apologizing, shaking hands, doing the whole performance of very busy, very important people who had kept someone waiting, Victor was already looking at Noor like the meeting had already taken place, and the rest was just noise. Over the following weeks, something shifted. Victor's team began requesting her specifically. Emails arrived with her name in the subject line. Calls came through her extension. Requests were addressed to her directly. The comfortable arrangement Ryan had built, where Noor did the thinking and he received the applause, started coming apart, quietly at the edges. Ryan noticed. The manager noticed. And the office shifted in that particular uncomfortable way it does when someone who was supposed to stay in the background stops cooperating with the script. The manager started giving Noor extra administrative tasks, small, pointless things designed to eat her time. Ryan began cutting her out of email chains, ending conversations when she walked in, doing the tiny, deliberate things people do when they want to remind someone of their place, without leaving any fingerprints. Pia pulled her aside one evening, over cheap noodles near the office, and said, "They're scared of you." Noor laughed. "I haven't done anything." Pia looked at her for a long moment. "That's exactly why," she said. Then came the Friday that broke everything open. The firm's internal review flagged a serious problem. A significant amount of money had been moved out of a client account, through a ghost account, across a series of transactions that had been constructed very carefully to look unplanned. Access logs showed timestamps. Records showed a name. Her name. She was called into the manager's office at 4 in the afternoon. HR was already present. The paperwork was already printed. She sat in the chair across from them and felt something cold and flat settle over her. Not panic, not grief, but a kind of terrible clarity. The recognition that every time she had made herself small to stay safe, she had also been making herself easier to frame. She had no one to call, no colleagues who would speak up, no internal record of the work that was actually hers. She had spent years staying invisible, and now someone had used that invisibility to erase her completely. She carried her things out of the building in a small box at 4:45. The open floor plan watched her go. No one said a word, not even Pia, who was standing frozen by her desk with her hand pressed over her mouth, eyes full of tears, completely powerless. Noor went home. She sat in the dark in her flat and stared at nothing. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She had reached that flat, hollow place on the other side of shock, where everything is perfectly still and very, very heavy. She called her mother, got voicemail, left a message that said, everything was fine, in a voice that said clearly that it wasn't. At 9 o'clock that night, her phone lit up. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Noor. The voice was calm, accented, familiar. "Victor, I know what happened," he said. "And I know it wasn't you." She didn't say anything for a moment. "The person who did this has used this exact method before," he said. "Different firm, same pattern. Someone built a trail to point at you because you were the most convenient target. You had no allies. You had just become visible enough to be useful as a scapegoat. It was calculated." She sat with that. Then she asked him why he was calling. She meant it as a real question, not suspicion, not a test. She genuinely did not understand what it looked like when someone chose to stand in your corner without being asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because you looked at my account like it was something worth caring about. And you looked at me like I was just a person. Not a reputation, not a risk. Just a man with a complicated file. You have no idea how rare that is." He paused. "People who see clearly deserve to have someone see them back." She said yes. Victor moved without noise, which, she would come to understand, was how he had survived this long. His team pulled the original transaction logs, the ones from before they had been edited. They traced the patterns step by step, backward through the months. What they found was that Ryan had been quietly moving small amounts from multiple client accounts for well over a year. When the total became too large to keep hidden, he had needed someone to absorb the blame. Noor had been the obvious choice. Recently visible, no real allies. Her name freshly attached to the most important account in the building. The manager had known for months. He had stayed quiet because he had received his own share and found a comfortable reason to look away. Victor withdrew his entire account from the firm, a substantial amount, and sent a message to the board: open a full internal investigation within 72 hours, or his reason for leaving would be made public. The board opened the investigation in 48 hours. Ryan was let go and later faced legal proceedings. The manager resigned before the board could act further. A formal written apology arrived in Noor's inbox, along with an offer to return, reinstated, full back pay, a senior position. She closed the email and didn't respond. She had spent 23 years making herself small for a world that had turned that smallness into a weapon. She was not going back to it. Victor offered her a position as the lead analyst at his group. She accepted, not because she owed him anything, not because she needed saving, but because for the first time in her career, her name would be on her own work. No one would stand in front of her findings. No one would present her thinking as their own. She would sit at the front of the room. Pia joined her, 6 months later. She cried at her new desk on the first day. The good kind of crying, the kind that comes out when relief and gratitude and a little bit of disbelief all arrive at the same time. Things between Noor and Victor grew slowly, the way careful things do. Two people who had both learned not to trust quickly, circling something that neither of them fully had words for yet. There were dinners. Long conversations that started professional and gradually became personal. He told her honestly about where he came from, his family's history, the choices he had made to become something different from what he was born into. She told him about her mother, about growing up learning to disappear, about all the times she had swallowed a thought because silence felt like armor. He listened the way that certain people do, fully, without interrupting, storing everything. One evening he asked her, "If you had always known that someone was watching your back, do you think you would have been different?" She thought about it honestly, not for show, but really thought about it. "Louder," she said. "I think I would have been a lot louder." He looked at her steadily. "You still can be." She believed him, and slowly, not all at once, but day by day, in small decisions, she started to become that. A year later, she was standing at the front of a room. Her room. Her company name on the door outside. A group of people sitting in chairs, all looking directly at her. Not past her, not through her. At her, waiting for what she was about to say. Her mother was in the front row with her reading glasses on, hands folded in her lap, wearing the kind of expression that only comes from watching someone you sacrificed everything for finally arrive at the place you always knew they were heading. Tired eyes, proud smile, all of it. After the meeting, a young woman came up to Noor. Quiet, eyes slightly lowered, standing in that particular way that says, "I am trying not to take up too much space." Noor recognized it like a mirror. The girl asked, "How did you stop being a wallflower?" Noor looked at her for a moment. "I didn't stop being quiet," she said. "I just stopped letting people use my silence against me. That's the whole story." The quiet girl everyone looked past, the man who looked anyway. And the day she finally decided she was done letting the world decide how much space she was allowed to take up.